Earth, Lyrans, and Pleiadians. Let us bring it back to Earth around the time the Vegans lost because they lost the territorial rights. The Lyrans began to colonize and spread out into the system. This was just around the end of the dinosaur era. The Lyrans had their hearts set on some heavy-duty, massive genetic manipulation of the species that would later become primates on Earth. They felt these beings would be the most closely compatible with their consciousness. They thought they would create the perfect being that would help them return to Source. Here we go again. Obviously, these genetic projects would take a very long time to accomplish, but they had a lot of time because, unlike humans now, their lifespans were very, very long. In the words of science fiction author David Brin, galactic beings think long thoughts. Long-term plans matter not at all, for time was different for these long-lived forefathers. These Lyrans thought long thoughts. The idea of engaging in a genetic project that would take hundreds of thousands of years was not a big deal to them. They viewed time in a different way, thus they began their project. During this time, they were still sometimes living on Mars or Malduk in bases built there by the Vegans. They didn't really like it there all too much. The climate and atmosphere were not as suited to them as it was to the Vegans. They decided they would do whatever they could to live on Earth. Much time passed and groups broke off from the main established colonies, migrated to various parts of Earth. We are going to focus on one particular group for now. There was a group that colonized the area that is now known as Scandinavia. The land mass were different then, but that is the general area. These Lyrans felt a very strong emotional affinity with Earth. They made their lives here because they loved it so much. They were involved with the genetic work just a little bit, but as time went on, they were not so interested. They were more interested in making Earth their home. Since they decided they wanted to settle on Earth, they felt it would be in their best interest to take some Earth genetics and incorporate them in themselves. They were still having a few problems adapting to the planet in regard to oxygen content, gravitation fields, and such. For this reason, they took small amounts of primate DNA and incorporated it into their successive generations. They were eventually able to adapt to Earth. Time went on and the identity began to change. They were no longer Lyran. They became Earth Lyran. That is how they saw themselves. And notice Earth is first. They began to identify with Earth much more than their Lyran roots. Just about this time, there were conflicts going on with other extraterrestrial groups. There were lots of wars in the heavens and wars on Earth with different subgroups who wanted to conduct genetic engineering in different ways. It was becoming more and more difficult for them to live in peace without outside interference. It became unbearable. With a heavy heart, the Earth Lyran decided to leave Earth and go back out into space to find another star system that didn't have any claims. Their plan was to live, grow, and create a civilization that was free of polarity infighting. Though the migration took quite a while, they eventually found themselves in an area you now know as the Pleiades. The 7 stars that you see in the sky now are new stars. That particular area of space holds many stars and other frequencies, as well as stars even more distant than the ones you see. They colonized in that general area on older stars with systems that were already established. They found one particular planet that was very much like Earth. It was very green, lots of water, and many resources, so they made it their home. As they developed their culture and bred and grew, they began to develop a whole new identity that would eventually be known as Pleiadian. Their roots, however, were as Earth Lyrans. Many of the Pleiadians who interact with you now are literally your cousins because genetically they share your DNA. Their interest in you is not just academic. It is very emotionally based. Earth was their first home. They love Earth and have come back from time to time to interact with the different cultures that developed later on Earth. And this is a very strong connection. As a civilization in the Pleiades began to develop, other Lyran groups migrated and settled there as well. So in terms of genetic trees, you have Pleiadians, whose genetic stock is Earth Lyran, and you have Pleiadians, whose genetic stock is pure Lyran. As the Pleiadians developed, they were a very spiritually connected civilization. They didn't share their Lyran forefathers' drive for conquest and colonization. In fact, though they had a little bit of Lyran in them, in terms of wanting to create their own society, they had some influence from Vegan mysticism as well. Some of their interactions with Vegan mystics in the past had seeded some very deep spiritual beliefs within them. They brought this spirituality to their new Pleiadian home. Along the way, these new Pleiadians began to favor what you might call light over darkness, or the shadow. Of course, most people do favor positivity over negativity. However, they began to deny their own darkness. They wouldn't look at it. The energy of dark and light within the humanoid psyche is an ebb and flow like ocean tides. Can you imagine trying to stop low tide and only focus on high tide? Can you imagine trying to force only a high tide environment? And that was exactly what they were attempting to do. This created a huge imbalance within their psyche and the collective consciousness. Wherever there is an imbalance, the body or collective consciousness will always seek balance through whatever means available. The result was a plague that manifested itself through this Pleiadian system. The plague was similar to AIDS in it that it hit the immune system. Their immune system began to break down. Their normally vivacious, excited, passionate state gave way to weakness, lack of energy, and immune system failure. It began to get so bad that they pleaded with their scientists to find a cure, and no one could. Finally, they pleaded with their mystics, who were well vested in vegan mysticism and spirituality. The mystics conducted what you might call a vision quest, with prayer, chanting, meditation. The mystics received a vision that totally explained what had happened. This plague was occurring because of rampant denial of darkness and the total imbalance within the psyche of the collective population. They found a way to work the population through ceremony, education, and retraining, so that they began to walk into their own darkness, face their own fear, and heal the parts of themselves. This experience for the Pleiadians is one of their most poignant memories. It's still very close to them because they realize how near they came to annihilation. There was another historical event that was of major significance to the Pleiadians. At one point, the Pleiadians felt very full of themselves. They wanted to go out in the universe and save everyone and go back to Source. They were displaying their Lyran roots quite strongly. They happened upon the Orion system in its darkest time. They saw what was going on with the Orion net keeping everyone encased, and they became incensed. They decided to march right in and liberate the Orion home world. So how do you think that turned out? The Orions retaliated by destroying an entire Pleiadian planet. Some of you may remember that in one of the Star Wars movies, the Empire destroys a planet that had a rebel base on it. It was a very small part of the movie. Do you remember the emotion when that planet was destroyed? The part of the movie was tapping into memory. Luckily, the Pleiadians learned their lesson after this planet was destroyed. They knew they could no longer meddle. They kept that charred and lifeless in their solar system. It is still there today. They kept it as a reminder of the folly of war and as a reminder to maintain humility at all cost, never be arrogant. That memory is one carried very deeply within the Pleiadian soul. Sometimes it is difficult for them to talk about it. Millions of people lost their lives so the civilization could learn that lesson. Lemuria and Arcturus. Let's return to Earth now. There are so many aspects to the creation of the varied life on Earth because there are so many extraterrestrial species that influenced it. Let's move to the Pacific region, which would include southern Asia, India, Thailand, parts of Japan, Polynesia, Indonesia, and so more. This area in your mythology is known as Lemuria. Please keep in mind that we are skipping around in terms of planetary ownership and timeline. It is unavoidable for now. During the time of Lemuria, there was a treaty. The planet was not just owned by the Lyran colonies, but there was a treaty that allowed for the interaction of many races. There was Lyran influence, Vegan influence, Syrian influence, Pleiadian influence, and more. Right before the establishment of that colony of Lemuria, those in charge began to evaluate the galactic history up until that point. They saw that there hadn't really been much progress with anything. There was still conflict, war, and strife. What really had been accomplished? So to decide what was needed was Founder's influence coming right from Source. They thought, let's see if we can seed this new quality with some Founder influence, so its foundation is one of being connected and remembering Source. And maybe this will stop the conflict. They put the call out, if you will. What Founder wishes to help with this project? The answer was that a star Founder wanted to help. You know the star Founder by the name of Arcturus. All right, we will help, it said. Arcturus fragmented itself so there was enough energy to incarnate. Well, in actuality, it wasn't an incarnational process, but more of a manifestation, a densification of the pure Arcturian Founder energy. Those were the first beings who established Lemuria in very ancient times. They began to try to build a civilization whatever way they could. Is there anything else happening on the planet this time? Yes. On the other side of the planet, there are all these genetic projects being done by Lyrans and Syrians and others who are still working on the creation of the perfect human being using primate DNA. This was going on during the same time. The Pacific area was a bit more isolated at this time. Earth was very much a laboratory. The Arcturian beings have influenced some of the Polynesian cultures, such as the Balinese, the early Indians and the Indonesians, especially the Thai. The whole Polynesian chain was influenced, including Easter Island and what is now Hawaii. So what is the nature of this Arcturian founder energy? What is it like? The energy is fundamentally balanced male-female. It is emotionally balanced, which means that dark, light, and love and fear and the whole dynamic are very equally balanced. It is extremely emotionally healing. So anyone coming in contact with an Arcturian energy and surrendering to it will be forced to move into a resonance with it. This would purge emotional blocks and bring forth healing. Ideally, then, this Arcturian energy could really be a wonderful foundation for civilization. But of course, they were aware that the civilization ultimately cannot be just Arcturian, because that is too integrated and will not achieve what they wish to do in this reality. Eventually, they are going to have to fragment, and they knew that. For now, they hoped to set a very strong base upon which they could then build their society. Let us take a moment to tell you about the Arcturian energy as it relates to you as individuals. The Arcturian founder has agreed to provide a very unique service for humans. Whenever you are born into the system or die or move out of the system, you pass through a tunnel between realities, and you are connecting with the Arcturus energy. The best way to describe it is that Arcturus has embraced that tunnel, and you are basically passing through the Arcturus energy when you are born or die. This serves to emotionally cleanse the person making a transition. When babies come through, they have just come through the Arcturian gate. When souls who do not remain as astral, trapped entities leave through the Arcturus gate, they get cleansed as well. In a sense, Arcturus serves like a black hole, white hole gate through which consciousness passes. This is the gift they have given to this reality. For a period of time, the Lemurian civilization in its early days was very harmonious. There were no problems. But though we mean it in a very loving way, it was very sterile because it did not provide a challenge. The very early Lemurians took some of the ancient Vegan priesthood teachings because they had been adapted to Earth in the past. They began to implement them because it became really obvious that Earth needed to begin to form its own identity. They figured that because the Vegans were the first ones here, they could use their mysticism practices while they had been around the longest. After a while, the other entities on the planet involved in the genetic engineering were watching the growing Lemurians' culture and thought, that looks really idyllic. Maybe I'll take a vacation there. There began to be more and more pressure from the rest of the planet to move into this Lemurian energy and interact with it. It was almost that the other civilizations saw Lemuria as a beautiful pond or fountain to drink from that would satiate their thirst. So you can see where this is going. The other groups on the planet began to fight over who would control this paradise. Same story. Just about this time, these Arcturian beings began to go into hiding. At that time, hiding meant going into lava caves in Polynesia that went deep into Earth. Some began or ended up in Peru, Chile, Bolivia, Western North America, Asia, or Indonesia. These Arcturian beings did not want to participate in the control battles in Lemuria that they were not going to give up on their agreement to come to Earth and assist. Thus, they simply lived underground and became the caretakers of the planet's energy, the energy of mass consciousness. They made themselves available to assist with emotional healing or any other kind of healing for those who were sensitive enough to perceive their energy and ask for help. They would never impose their help without being asked. At this point, you had a migration into Lemuria by other beings on the planet. This was a hodgepodge: Lyrans, Vegans, Syrians, Pleiadians, and other assorted characters. They began to take over the civilization and attempt to emulate how the Lemurians lived. But of course, they never really had the same energy behind their actions as the Lemurians did.